Hello and good evening. Welcome to the Black Belt Academy of Surgical Skills. My name is David O'Regan. I'm a cardiac surgeon in Yorkshire in the United Kingdom, and I'm also the director of the Faculty of Surgical Trainers for the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. I'm sorry I missed you last week. I was actually at the college attending the NOTS course, which is teaching non-technical skills in surgery. And that is the equally, if not more important element of surgery. Black Belt Academy of Surgical Skills is focusing purely on ergonomics and building your own surgical skills. We're all familiar with these scissors, use them in everyday practice, cutting kitchen, cellophane, tin foil, wrapping paper, string, and they're part of everyday practice. And because we're cutting heavy goods, 2 fingers and a thumb go through there so you can apply pressure on the blades. Scissors actually appeared in Mesopotamia and in ancient Egypt, and the original forms were just 2 blades folded round on a piece of steel, and like the old sheep shearers, were used for cutting. It was the Romans who actually put the pivot in the scissors, and the scissors name derives from a Latin word like scissors meaning tailor, and also cinderer, which means split. And scissors have been used by barbers and surgeons throughout the centuries. But I suppose the first formal invention of the scissors happened just down the road in Sheffield in the 1800s by Robert Hinchcliffe, clearly with the advent of steel in the Sheffield area, and he produced the scissors. And this is one of my most favorite instruments, and these are the Macindoe dissecting scissors. Beautifully and eloquently designed. Archibald Macindoe was actually a house officer at Waikato Hospital in New Zealand. And that's funnily enough where my colleague David McCormack is a practicing cardiac surgeon, but he is fourth or fifth dan now in karate and master of the Black Belt Academy of Surgical Skills and should be doing the same in the Southern Hemisphere. But anyway, Archibald Macindoe was spotted by no less than um, the other famous surgeon who, and you know what, his name has just skipped my mind. Isn't that dreadful? Is at the top of the stairs at Leeds General Infirmary. And he spotted the fantastic talent of Macindoe and invited him to come to England, where he worked with Gillies, the ENT surgeon, at Barts. He subsequently went on to develop a practice in plastic surgery and made his name at East Grinstead Hospital. And he is the forefather of modern plastic surgery and reconstruction. And his name is lent to these. But what I like about Macindoe is that he was operating on young Spitfire pilots who were severely burned. And he developed some fantastic reconstruction techniques. But that wasn't the whole story, because he was worried about the self-worth of his patients. He only employed attractive nurses that would make a fuss over his patients. And story has it, a lot of hanky-panky went on in the various broom cupboards at East Grinstead, and many a pilot and many a nurse got married. And they formed the Guinea Pig Club, which I read in the Sunday Times some 6 years ago, was unfortunately disbanded because the number of veterans left was not enough to hold the club. So with that story in mind, I always ask that when you use the Macindoe scissors, that you use them with respect. And it was Lloyd Moynihan in Leeds who had spotted that talent in the beginning. But before we go into that, I read an excellent book called Expert by Roger Nieburn, is a professor of surgery and education at Imperial College. And it fits very nicely with the theme of being at one with the instrument. And this is using your senses and having a feel. And he describes an engraver who's cutting out names with tools of spit stickers, scorpers, borons, burnishes, like surgical instruments. And he could hear the crunch of each tool on the smooth and hard wood. Andrew, who was doing this, Roger describes, called it as painting with light and listening and feeling with the instruments. And that's exactly what surgery is with learning, is listening and feeling and being at one with the instrument. So with that in mind, I would like to take you over to the head cam now and demonstrate some of these principles. Hold on tight. So we are all familiar from going back to kindergarten school of cutting out paper. And we remember cutting out paper was difficult in the first instance. And you might scoff at this being the first exercise in the Black Belt Academy of Surgical Skills. But the important thing is to be able to cut out paper without leaving ragged edges like that, but cutting out smooth. And this art of cutting paper was refined in the 16th century by Chinese artists who can do this. And one of my Chinese students gave me a selection of these beautiful cutouts, all done by hand and with paper. Just imagine the skill. And the scissors they used, and this company's been in business since 1648, are these scissors. And they are actually held in the hand. And I thought ergonomically was strange compared to actually how we hold and feel a surgical instrument. These are fabulously sharp, and they're called a pair of scissors because two blades are crossing each other like that. So enough of the interesting aspects. How do you actually hold the scissors? Well, the important thing again, as we've been stressing in the Black Belt Academy, is to use your feel. We do not recommend that you put the distal interphalangeal joint through the scissors, and indeed my thumb will not go through that, but you hold it at the tip of your fingers. And because, as we've said previously, is at the tip of your thumb, your ring finger, middle finger, and the support and feel and proprioception from your index finger. When you think of the homunculus in the brain, the hand is disproportionately big because that is what you feel with. So, balanced lightly with the thumb, ring finger, middle finger, and the index finger is extended down the middle. And you gently open and close the scissors. Now, the index finger stabilizes the scissors, and this is a stable triangle, as you can see here in holding. The other important thing is that the curve of the scissors is curved away because you're actually looking down your scissors in your hand. You should be able to see the belly and to see the point. If you turn it up this way, you can see the point of the scissors, but you can't see the belly. And in dissecting solid organs like a liver or lung, it is possible that you're watching the tips of your scissors, but the belly is cutting through the pulmonary artery. And I would not recommend you do that. In fact, I would say you are dissing Mackinder by holding the scissors incorrectly. Balance lightly in the hand, fingers extended down, and looking at the curve of the wrist. So, as we've got here, we're going to be cutting out circles, and we invite you to practice the same, not opening the scissors up too far, but gently cutting round and avoiding, if possible, any dog ear like I've demonstrated there. And we'll do the same with strips of paper too. It was pointed out to me that it was rare that surgeons actually hold scissors with a ring finger. And I think that I developed from my days of general surgery, because what we often did was flip the scissors up, and that left those three fingers available, if you think about it, to tie a knot. So we're just going to demonstrate tying a knot here. We'll go into knot tying in next week's episode. But my hand is free and my fingers are free to tie knots. And if I don't have an assistant, then I've got my scissors palmed and I can flick them out and cut. A bit like a switchblade, really. But it enables those three fingers to continue tying knots while that is in your hand. In cardiac surgery, I wouldn't recommend palming your instruments, because sutures and material indeed might get caught on your scissors and pull. What I hope you noticed is when I cut that suture, that scissors didn't open further than necessary to do the job. Too often, I see assistants take the scissors and they swoop in from the theatre light, like in the movie Tora, 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 come through and flourish, and they take the scissors away. The positioning of the scissors in the theatre field is deliberate. To take it down, open them up as you require, and cut. Take them away. If necessary, support the scissors with either a finger or an instrument, as you would use a fob with a painting brush, and cut it. Another exercise that you need to practice with cutting sutures, which I think has served me well over time, is the discipline of knowing how far to cut. As we've explained and will explain again in our knot tying sessions next week, different sutures made of different material require to be cut at different lengths. Very often, the surgeon is going to say, cut 1 centimeter or cut 2 centimeters. But it'd be interesting to practice when you're saying cut 1 centimeter. I would like to see it cut exactly 10 millimeters, not 11, not 9, but 10 each time. And the reason for that is it's training my eye for making arteriotomies, and I can see exactly what 10 is. And you can ask the same then for 2 millimeters. And it'd be a challenge to actually measure these and put a rule up against it and see how accurate that is. I think that is probably about right, and that is probably a bit too long. So when cutting sutures, you can discipline yourself to judge how much you're cutting of the suture, and I promise you, it'll stand you in good stead. So, dissection. These scissors are beautiful for dissection, but they're very simple, very, very simple rules. One, the scissors themselves can actually stick through the tissue. Two, if you open them up wide, it can tear the tissue. Three, if you then close the scissors within the tissue, you could cut something inadvertently, and that's not recommended. Now, I'm always looking for different models that you can use at home to practice. And I've thought, and this evening as I was looking around the kitchen, that this tangerine provides a lovely surface to actually dissect. I know it's round and it's difficult to hold on the table, but it reminds me of dissecting off a thick pericardium of a heart, or the thick cortex of the lung, and being able to gently open the scissors up and develop the tissues without cutting into the fragile heart or lung underneath. And I thought that this was a very nice model for practicing skills because, as you can see there, quite easy, stick it in, tear the tissue like that. By clean dissection and developing over the surface and getting just a feel of how you can use the scissors to dissect tissue. It's an aside and not actually included in the Black Belt Academy, but what we do is use our pork belly, flip it over, and use this as a lovely surface or medium to practice our dissection. And what we want to see in the Black Belt Academy is that your dissection proceeds along the tissue planes and that you've got appropriate use of your forceps in retracting and holding your tissue without drifting, dragging, or squeezing as previously described. You'll see that all these adhesions and adhesions in general in the abdomen or around the chest are usually stronger than the tissues themselves. So I wouldn't recommend sweeping them off. There's resistance. Sharp dissection, as with a knife, is clean dissection. So I'm not plunging the scissors into the tissue. I can see the tips. I'm opening it up gently and developing plane, meeting the resistance, feeling the tissue, and actually cutting. Sometimes I can brush it off gently with the tips of my scissors, but I can feel resistance, and therefore I need to actually cut. Obviously, being wearing of neurovascular bundles, and you should have a clear idea of what nerves, arteries, and veins look like. They're not white, red, and blue, as you'd see in the anatomy books. What we have here is another plane and an opportunity, again, to dissect a plane. One of the best, there you go, there's a neurovascular bundle there. You can see the vessel, and I can actually confidently dissect around that. And indeed, sometimes you will see these in small areas of dissection, which brings me on to another part and how to hold your scissors. If you think about it, if you're operating at depth, I cannot bring my hand in over the top like that to get to the bottom to cut a suture down there. So the recommended way to hold it is what I call the inverse grip, or commonly used by my colleagues in ENT surgery. In this situation, my small finger is extended down the scissors. I'm again now holding it between my index finger and my thumb, and my middle and ring fingers are stabilizing the scissors. This means that I can put my hand into an operative area that's very small, and again cut a suture at depth confidently. Note that I can, without very little movement of my upper arm, rotate my wrist and abduct my shoulder and operate in a very small confined space, yet at the same time I can see the belly and the tips as an inverted view and holding the scissors. I love dissection. I think it's jolly good fun and could spend hours playing with a bit of tissue like this, dissecting out the planes. And as I'm doing that, I felt a little resistance there, and I wonder if there's a vessel behind. But if I dissect it out in this loose areolar tissue, I can put my scissors behind like that. You can see there is nothing else behind there, so I'd be confident in actually cutting this. Okay, because there's nothing else behind there. And I've dissected behind. I can put my scissors behind there. You can see my scissors. There's a small vessel there, but it's not a nerve. I'll cut through, and voila, we enter another tissue space, and we're developing planes. So, coming back to the top. At all parts of that dissection and holding the scissors, I'm getting proprioceptive and sensory feedback from my scissors, telling me where there's any resistance whatsoever. And the movement is not hurried, it's not frenetic. I'm not opening the scissors necessary further than to do the job. I'm not stabbing the scissors into the tissue. I'm opening and closing the scissors, having a direct view all the time of what I'm cutting. There's no blind cutting at all. Forceps are complementing that action by retracting. That can be your forceps or those of the assistant. And if you're over a very broad plane, a couple of robots to hold them up in the air, or even if necessary, put a couple of sutures and stitch it up out the way to enable you to work over a broad plane. There are longer versions of the scissors. These are the Mackindos. The next step up, about that long, are the Nelsons, and the very longest are the Medicine Gov. I personally, when opening redo cardiac operations, I like the Nelson scissors. Why? Because the tips are a lot rounder than the Mackindos, and you're less likely to stab. The other thing is because we don't use the Nelson scissors that frequently, I often find they are sharper and the mechanism is a lot more solid with less play. I do appreciate if you are left-handed, scissors are problematic, and I'd encourage you to actually use them with your right hand. Now, if this has made sense to you, I'd like you to comment on the Facebook page, and please, if you have any insights or further suggestions, do leave them on our webpage, which is bbass.org. I hope this evening has made sense to you. Wherever you are in the world, I'm going to wish you a good night, good evening, good morning, or good day, and hope that you stay safe and you will join me next week where we will continue our instruction in knot tying. Thank you very much indeed for joining the Black Belt Academy of Surgical Skills. Good night.